Hello, very good morning to all of you. And I believe that you have been enjoying the orientation sessions so far, and that we have seen each other for quite a number of days from the very beginning, from the initial day or the inauguration day. And I'm sorry that I'm not in a position to switch on the video today. However, let me introduce briefly who am I and what am I going to talk today. So in the schedule, the talk might, or the title of the talk might appear as a conservation of, say, energy, reduction of waste, saving energy and saving water, or something close to that. But I thought I should change it a bit, and I would title my talk today as Becoming a Responsible Citizen for the Environment. And I am Deepchanti Lekhamge, attached to the Department of Natural Resources of your faculty. Right. So my talk would be a little more different than what it was intended to be, because what I thought was I'm speaking to a general audience, a diverse audience, whereas I would be having students from all 4 departments of the faculty. And I wanted you to make you interested in knowing what sort of a world are we living in. What are the real world challenges that you're facing today in terms of the environment? And how can you all play a role there in order to make it a better place, in order to make the world a kind of a nicer one for the future generations, right? Okay. All right. In this slide, I just have put some 4 pictures, whereas you could see a climate activist in the top picture, and the second stand for something called COP28. And again, you have the same student, same girl, same activist with a book, and there's another import publication there. Right. I believe most of you may sometimes have come across this young lady who is Greta Thunberg, right? Perhaps somebody who is closer to your age, a very young climate activist of the world today, an inspirational figure to many, who started her climate activism, or who started to voice out in order to save the world from the negative impacts of global warming many years back, and has made an impact in terms of conserving the nature, preserving the environment, mitigating the global climate change impacts, and addressing them with reasonable solutions. Right. Before coming there, what is climate change? What is global warming? I believe you all have an understanding why do we need to talk this much about climate change, right? I don't think that I need to talk or explain much about that, because this July, the 2023 July, the last month, just a few days back, it was July. So this year's July was perhaps the hottest month. It was a record month for temperature in most parts of the world. So we have already reached, we have already come to, we are already experiencing the worst impacts of the global warming. If I put it in simple terms, simply, the global warming stands for the rise of the temperature in the global atmosphere, and attributed by the increase of greenhouse gases that we emit, that humans emit, right? We don't breathe it out all the time, but there are many other human-induced activities that contribute to global warming, or that contribute to the increase of greenhouse gases. What then are greenhouse gases? You all know carbon dioxide is one of the major greenhouse gases in this atmosphere, whereas it is also accompanied by numerous other gases like methane, chlorofluorocarbons, ground level ozone, and all that. How have we increased the global greenhouse gas composition? Basic driver being the increased burning of fossil fuels. The world's population today lie at 8 billion plus. It has just exceeded the 8 billion as well. So it's a matter of imagining how this 8 billion plus population, with increased requirements of fossil fuels, with increased requirements of energy, what amount of carbon dioxide are they emitting to our global atmosphere when we compare it with the pre-industrial ages? Pre-industrial ages, right? Some of you might have heard the Industrial Revolution 4.0 or whatever those. So the world is a very dynamic place. If you go back to 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, and gradually come up to today, you may realize that the world has changed a lot. The Industrial Revolution, the industrialization, the urbanization, the population growth, the energy requirements, various sorts of other anthropogenic activities, how have they caused the global changes in numerous spheres? It might be the biosphere, it might be the hydrosphere, it might be the lithosphere or the geosphere, or it might be the atmosphere. In all these spheres, we have made, as humankind, we have made great changes, serious changes. One of which is the global climate change, perhaps the most severe thing, coming out basically because of the unacceptable rise of the global greenhouse gas emissions. That is why climate change has taken this sort of a place, right? So Greta Thunberg is a climate activist among many, right? Among many. And I just wanted to inspire you all by putting her picture here, that you all are the future generation of this world. You all have to take your own leads. You all have to take your own steps to mitigate the negative impacts of whatever the anthropogenic activities that we have made as a humankind, made as a humanity. We now need to reverse them in order to make the world a better one, right? So this COP28, what is this? It will take place in Dubai in 2 months' time, 2-3 months' time, in a couple of months' time. This stands for the Conference of Parties, the 28th Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. What then is this UNFCCC, or the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change? In simple terms, the Climate Change Conference. It's one of the most attended, most important and significant conferences when it comes to the global conferences or global agreements, right? Some of you might have an understanding about multilateral environmental agreements. Multilateral environmental agreements. The world's nations or states have come together to arrive in different agreements in order to address global changes, in order to address numerous issues and challenges that we face as a global community. Most of the problems that we face today, in terms of the climate, in terms of the nature, in terms of the environment, we are not feeling them in isolation. We are feeling them, we are experiencing them, we are encountering them as global citizens. So we need global action. We need global action. We need concerted action. We need cumulative action, because we are facing them as a global community. There are global changes and global issues, most of the case. So this COP28 would be taking place in November 2023 in Dubai, where we need to look back at what have we been doing so far and how much of a progress have we achieved, and what have we got to do in the future in terms of mitigating the climate change and its impacts, and in terms of arriving at sound climate adaptation technologies or climate adaptation mechanisms. What then is climate adaptation? Climate adaptation is what would be effective as mechanisms to face the climate change, in order to stop it, in order to mitigate it, in order to hold it. What have we got to do? What would be the most efficient means and methods that we might have to take as a world, as a global community, right? So that is for your general understanding that we do have these sort of global actions all the time when it comes to the environment, right? If you search, if you study further, you may find numerous other examples related to these sort of global actions that are there out there in the world in order to make sure that the environment is conserved. We are taking care of the environment. We are having a concern of the environment and the nature and the natural resources. So because we don't have any other way out, we don't have an escape other than conserving what is left for us, because we as a humanity have put an overly impact, an overly burden, an excessive burden all the time. Right? We are just one single species on this earth. If you look at how many species do we have on this earth, we are just one. But if you think this one species, what amount of damage, what amount of pressure has this one species placed on this single earth? We don't have any other earths. We only have a single earth, a single planet, and we have a constant amount of resources. We have been having a constant amount of resources. Now that we have been declining it, we have been making it even less in most of the cases, right? Because there are regenerative resources, there are non-regenerative resources. So petroleum fuels is one of the non-regenerative resources. They are not renewable, right? For the past 100 or so years, we have been depleting these resources in a very unsustainable manner. Unsustainable. I believe most of you all have an understanding about what is sustainable and how should you define unsustainable, right? We'll come into them later, maybe. So the world today is very dynamic. There are activism, numerous sorts of movements today going on in order to make sure that the existing or the remaining resources are kept in a constant sort of an existence. Because we have to think about the future. We need to make sure that the resources would be there for the future generations of the world as well. Right? Hopefully the world has recognized that the resources are depleting in a very serious manner. So we have to take action immediately. Global changes are occurring in a very serious manner. We have to curb them. We have to mitigate them immediately. One of which is the global climate change, one of the issues, right? Because we have increased the greenhouse gas emissions, the greenhouse gas composition in the atmosphere in an unacceptable manner, we are today experiencing the global climate change. Starting from the sea melt, the glaciers melting, the sea ice melting, starting from there, numerous impacts and negative consequences on the nature, ecosystems, species are today being imposed. And we have to take action against that, right? Island nations are in threat of being like disappearing because the sea level is rising. Climate is changing. Rains are disappearing. Sometimes unexpected floods are coming in. Unexpected climatic events are taking place. Numerous diseases are on the rise. Why? Because the temperatures are rising. In terms of the human health, yes. and ecosystems more specifically. Important, significant, and very valuable ecosystems are on the threat. Species are on the verge of extinction because of the impact of this global warming. So it's high time that we need to take climate adaptation. Climate adaptation, right? Okay. So in the center of all these issues, what do we find? Resources. Resources, right? I'm not going to define a resource because you all must have your own definitions for what a resource is. You know, when I say resource, you all know what a resource is, right? Resources are the link connecting climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and every other thing to economic activity. Actually, in the scientific definition of a resource, the economic part is already there. Something that is of utility and something that would have an economic value. Right? It has to have these two characters all the time to call it a resource. So economic activity is driven by the amount of existing resources on the earth. So when the resources deplete in a kind of a very serious manner, severe manner, it essentially impacts the economy, right? It essentially impacts the economy. You don't need to go far. Even inside our own island or country, you might find examples where resource quality is degraded, depleted. What happens? An entire economy can be collapsed. Yes. Only by putting resources at the center of our attention, we can solve many challenges we face. Therefore, we need to think about conserving resources. We need to think about conserving resources. Okay. They provide the foundation for the goods, services, and infrastructure that make up our current socio-economic systems. Right? They provide the foundation for the goods, services, and infrastructure. So those are perhaps the three basic elements that comprise the current socio-economic system. We as individuals, we as families, we as communities, we as countries, we as regions, and the entire globe, we have to have a certain sort of stability. So this stability would be only maintained if the resources or the resource base is well maintained, conserved, and preserved. So what are the resources? It might be biomass, it might be fossil fuels, it might also be metals, it might be non-metallic minerals, it should also be the land, it should be the water. So when you see these 7 points or 6 points, you realize that without these, we are not going to exist. Yes. All right. The biomass is wood and various kinds of, for food, we depend on the biomass, we depend on the plants. So that land and water, biomass, land and water are very sensible to very tangible examples to you, right? So you know that we cannot exist without them. Without plants, without land, without water, we cannot exist. What about metals and non-metals? Do we need them? Of course we do. And they are non-renewable, the other fact. They are non-renewable. There is only a constant amount available on this earth. And could you take a moment to think, what amount of metal are you having inside your own lifestyle? What amount of metals do you require for your electronic devices, for your mobile phone, for various sorts of other stuff? For example, take your televisions, radios, or whatever those communication devices, and then take your automobile requirements. You essentially need vehicles. May it be a private vehicle or a public one. So the metals and these resources also play a vital part. And just take a moment to think, when the human population has risen to 8+ billion or so by now, can you just imagine the pressure that you are placing on all these resources? Not only on metals, right? But starting from the plants, starting from the land, starting from the water. Can you just imagine that we have made a huge pressure that the earth can hardly bear. Actually, the earth cannot bear this pressure. Right? Let me explain how we have got to understand it. Right? So this is a graphical representation how this demand for resources have increased from 1900 to 2050 or 2005. Okay. And this also shows how the material extraction has increased. Extraction, what does that mean? You're taking the materials for your consumption, right? The green goes with the biomass, and then it is the fossil fuels, and then comes the metals, and finally in the light orange comes the non-metallic minerals. You can see from 1970 to 2015 or perhaps 2017, how has it increased? You can see the increase of the extraction rates. And in the black line, you see the material productivity. What is that? Output over input. What amount of output are we creating in terms of inputs? It has gone down. Something that we cannot be happy. Why? As far as you use more input to make a certain output, that means you're not efficient, you're not productive. But at the same time, you're creating huge pressure on the existing resources. That means the resources are depleting. At a time where resources are being depleted, if your productivity also drops, that is a huge concern. Why? So ultimately, you are going to go into a zero sort of a resource availability if it is going to be continued like that. So you have to find out ways where your productivity could be increased. What is the only way out? Nothing other than making resource use efficiency higher and higher as much as possible. What does that mean? Resource use efficiency. Efficiency, what is that? Efficient use. Some of you might have heard this. Efficient use, efficient. In Sinhala, you call it maybe the Karyakshamatala. In which sort of an efficiency are we using the resources? Or in other terms, doing more with less. 50 years back, we have been using 1 liter of water to do some work. But today we cannot use that 1 liter for that amount of work, that amount of utility. We have only 500 milliliters of water to fulfill that requirement. How have we got to plan? We have to plan in a way that with 250 milliliters, we are going to fulfill that. So that is how it goes. In simple example, agriculture is a sector where water is badly needed. We need huge amounts of water for agriculture. But if I put this question onto you, the requirement of agriculture has increased a lot. If you compare it with 100 years, before 100 of years from today, the agricultural requirements was less because the population was less. Today, the population is very high. The demand for food is increased. So we need agriculture more and more in order to feed the people. But today, at the same time, we have less amount of water available for that. So what have we got to do? We have to turn into innovative agricultural methods where water is being used in a more efficient manner. Because we don't have that much of water. We cannot simply spend that much of water that we have been using number of years back for agriculture today, because the needs and demands have been increased. Resources are being depleted. We have to find out numerous ways, innovative ways, creative ways to make sure that our resource use efficiencies are increased. So this is the scenario for everywhere. It might be land, it might be water, it might be something else. If you take the land, it is the same. The land availability has gone down because the population is the basic factor. And various kinds of other reasons coming out from this cause. We don't have enough land today because we have many people to occupy that land. How can we use the land efficiently? By making sure that we are putting it into the optimal use. We are not wasting, we are not degrading the land. Right? Okay. Historical and current patterns of natural resource use. This is what I've been talking, natural resource use. The use of water resource, the use of land resource, the use of atmosphere, the use of various other resources. Historical and current patterns of natural resource use are resulting in increasingly negative impacts on the environment and human health. Certain practices that we have been having as a humanity have led to serious concerns today. We have been using petroleum fuels as if they were renewable, right? We have been using petroleum like that. It was not a very wise sort of a pattern that we used petroleum because we knew that it is an unrenewable resource, but we have been increasingly used it. Now that since we have left with no option, now that we are diverging and converting into renewable energy resources. Yes, true. That is something that we could have done 50 to 60 years back. So these patterns of resource use have led to a kind of a catastrophe by now, right? 50% of global climate change impacts, 90% of global biodiversity loss and water stress, and 11% of global species loss accounts for our own ways of consumption of these resources, right? That is, again, us who have brought these impacts towards us. That is why we call them all anthropogenic, human-induced reasons, anthropogenic reasons. What is biodiversity loss? Biodiversity loss? I believe you all know what is biodiversity. So today we are at a huge threat. We are imposing huge threats to the biodiversity. It actually includes us, yes, because we are a species. We are Homo sapiens, just one species on this earth. And there are many other species, many other ecosystems which represent the biodiversity, without which the humans would not have any existence, yes. But the biodiversity is at huge threat. It might be the terrestrial ecosystems or the ecosystems that we do have on the land, that is forests, different vegetations, even a paddy field represents some diversity, right? Even though the main species is the paddy there might be various kinds of other species of plants, animals, and all. So terrestrial, land, there are land ecosystems. In the same way, there are aquatic ecosystems, rivers, streams, lakes, reservoirs, and all that. And there might be oceanic ecosystems, right? The seas and oceans, the lagoons, the coral reefs, the seagrasses, everything. It's enormous. But throughout the entire ecosystem spectrum, humans have today imposed severe threats to the existence of this biodiversity. Because of human activities, 90% of global biodiversity is at a kind of a threat to be lost. We are going to have numerous important species swept off from the earth for permanently, forever. That is extinction, right? So this is the world we live in. This is the earth we live in. What is the ultimate cause behind all this? Nothing but our consumption patterns, the way we have consumed, the way we have degraded the resources, the way we have polluted the environment. Those are the reasons, nothing else, right? So it's high time that you all have to understand this as well, irrespective of your domain. Not only the environmental resources students would have to have this understanding. Everybody, every one of us has to have this understanding. Why? Because this is a kind of a cumulative effort that we need to curb this, to mitigate this. Every single citizen has his own responsibility to become a sensible citizen, to become a responsible citizen. Right? Once you know these things, once you are aware of these facts, it's kind of easy for you to become a responsible citizen, because you know, every time you do something, every time you use some water, every time you use an energy source, every time you burn some fuel at least, now that you would start to feel, I'm using a finite resource. I'm emitting greenhouse gases because of my transport, because of my consumption of this specific, whatever the product. The impact that I place on the environment, the impact that I place on the nature and the natural resources, I have to have a kind of responsibility on that, right? It's only from these local acts, individual acts, that we might be able to achieve our global goal. The global goal is nothing other than conservation of the nature, right? So this picture shows one Earth plus something close to 3/4 of another Earth. I'm not going to place emphasis on the text here. Just look at the picture. So if you really calculate the amount of requirement, the amount of demand that the world places on the resources of this Earth, to satiate that, to fulfill that demand, actual number of Earths, the actual amounts of Earth is this. Amounts of Earth is this. It's not just one Earth, but something far greater than just one Earth. All right. If you just Google today, once after this lecture, if you just Google the ecological overshoot, right? Ecological overshoot, or Earth's Overshoot Day 2023. You may take it down if you're interested, right? Just type Earth's Overshoot Day. Earth's Overshoot Day 2023. Right? You'd come up with the result. 2nd of August, just 5 days before, right? 2nd of August 2023 was the overshoot day for this year. What does that mean? Earth's Overshoot Day. What does that mean? Overshoot? It might give you an idea that you go into a debt afterwards, right? Overshoot is whatever the amounts that was allocated for this year by the Earth, we as a global humanity have exceeded that well before we come into the end of the year, right? A year would start from January 1st and it would end in 31st of December, right? 12 months. But right at the beginning of the 8th month, right? We have 12 months in a year. Right at the beginning of the 8th month, if we are going to go into a debt, right now, right today, we are utilizing the resources that were there for the next year. Can you just believe that entire number of months that we are going to have after the overshoot day, we are going in a debt? These are calculations, but they give sense actually. These are all calculations, but they are made based on numerous scientific data and assumptions. There are organizations, there are established organizations, right? If you're really interested, you may read further on the web. They are easily there online, all these sources. There are organizations who calculate these indicators. These are indicators. They give us an idea. They indicate us. They warn us. They warn us that our consumption patterns are very bad, right? So we have gone into the debt already. So we have entire 4 months to go in the 2023 year. But we have already finished the resources that we were allocated for this year. So the same idea is represented in this number of Earths that we need to satiate our demands as a global community, right? I think you now have an idea. The amount of pressure that the humanity places on the Earth is simply unbearable to that. Unbearable to this Earth. It's a planet, right? There is a constant amount of everything in there. It is true that there are renewable resources, but still, it's the renewability also is a kind of a circular process. We have interrupted those processes very severe. So we have threatened the renewability and the regenerative ability. Yes. Right. So ultimately, we don't know if our consumption patterns, if our pollution sort of patterns, ways, if we are going to continue them, we might find us in a collapse someday in the future very soon. Yes. That is why the global organizations like the United Nations Environmental Program, and various kinds of other organizations are taking steps as much as they could as a global community, right? Together with all nations. That is why they're taking measures. Other than that, we are not going to have our existence, right? So we all have, as individual citizens, we all have our role to play, right? Irrespective of the number of agreements that we do have, irrespective of the number of conferences that we might attend as countries, nations, and states, it might make no sense if we are not going to become individual, responsible citizens, right? So I mentioned you about the ecological overshoot or the Earth Overshoot Day, where we go into an ecological burden, ecological debt afterwards. So last week, just 5 days before, we went into this debt as a global humanity. Ecological footprint also is a concept like that. Why do we have these indicators? Because the world, the populations, the people, the society have to be educated, they have to be informed, they have to be warned that our consumption patterns are not acceptable. By looking at this concept also, we realize that our consumption rates are not acceptable, right? The ecological footprint is also a similar concept to the Earth's Overshoot Day, where all our requirements would be converted into a land equivalent. If you take your own self from the beginning of your day, from the amount of toothpaste that you would use to brush your teeth, up until you go into the bed in the night, what amount of resources are you using? Your glass of milk, then your meal, if it contains meat or not, or fish or not. There are many things. What are you going to wear? Is it something coming from cotton, something coming from polyester? What amount of transport are you going to have involved in your day-to-day activities? What amount of fossil fuel are you going to burn for that? And then the timber requirements, the furniture that you're going to have in your home, and all that. If you cumulatively put all of them into a land value, it can be converted, right? There are softwares that can convert your fossil fuel requirement, your paddy or the rice requirement, your various kinds of other things. All these requirements can be converted into hectare value, land value. What amount of land has been allocated or sacrificed for you to have your fossil fuels, for you to have your rice, for you to have your garments, for you to have your water, for you to have your maybe the other utensils that you use, the devices, the electronic appliances. All that. When you take them in a cumulative figure, what you come up with is called as a ecological footprint. Footprint, you know the footprint, right? It is a kind of a indicator that indicates the amount of land, amount of span, right? Footprint. That is why it is called ecological footprint. On the environment, what amount of impact are you making? Are you creating as an individual or as an individual nation, usually, right? In the bottom picture, you see how nations, low-income nations, lower middle-income countries, upper middle-income nations or high-income nations have increased their ecological footprints compared to 1970. All these represents the complexity of lifestyles that we have achieved during the past 50 years. That is something that we have to accept. Our lifestyles are so complicated and complex if we compare them with somebody who lived in 1950 years. But what have we got to do is you have to be rational, we have to be wise, we have to be sensible and responsible in practicing these luxurious lifestyles. Yes, we have to be actually not luxurious, we have to be sustainable. So make sure that you spend a little time of yours today to recognize how sustainable is your lifestyle. How sustainable is my lifestyle? What is the level of my resource consumption and how sensible have I been so far in using these resources? Am I going to keep the tap open while I brush my teeth? Am I going to keep the tap open and just let the water go? Am I going to iron my clothes on a daily basis, or am I going to do it on a weekly basis? Have I been having enough environmental consciousness during different sorts of activities of myself? These are all real-time problems that we have to ask from own selves of us. All right? Right. So the world has recognized, the world has understood that the only solution for protecting the environment while also maintaining the economic prosperity, right? It is a must. We cannot like simply say, okay, conserve the resources, don't think of development, no economic growth. No, we cannot say that. We have to achieve the economic growth. We have to achieve the development. We have to raise the social status of people, but all while we keep the resources in a conserved level, while we keep the resources in a sustainable manner. We cannot halt the development. We cannot suspend the economic growth in terms of conservation of resources. No, we have to find a balance, right? The world has recognized that the only way out is by decoupling. What do you mean by decoupling? Decouple, de-link, break. Delinking or decoupling the link or the relationship between resource use and economic growth. Right? During the previous part of my talk, you might have realized that why have we increased the use of resources? Because we have been on a run to achieve some economic growth, to achieve what we called development. Right? That is the sole reason behind all these increase of the ecological footprints and all that, because we were on a run as a society or as a humanity. We have been in a race to achieve something, some growth, we say, but it has not been a real growth. Why? Because we have depleting and degrading the resource base. So the only way out is we have to make sure that we are not degrading the resource base, but we are achieving the economic growth. For this to be done, what have we got to do? We have to de-link. We have to de-link the relationship between the resource use and economic growth. When the economic growth is achieved, resource use also should not be increased in the same rate. We have to make sure that we are keeping it at a lower rate. While we achieve the economic growth, we keep it at a lower rate. What? We keep the resource use at a lower rate, right? As depicted in here. Please look at the light orange line, which is the resource use, and the green line, which is the economic activity. What have we got to do? We have to, as much as possible, we have to increase the difference between these two. We have to achieve economic growth, but at the same time, it should not be something that is accompanied by increasing rate of resource use. Instead, it has to be kept at a lower level while economic growth is achieved. This is what in the beginning of my talk, what I mentioned as efficient use of resources, or doing more with less. If you can fulfill a task that required 1 liter of water previously, if you can fulfill it with 250 milliliters, then your efficiency is good. That is why we need innovative solutions in agriculture, in various kinds of other fields. We need them today. And it's the future generations. It's you, the youth, the young generations of the world that are like, you are the people who would be making these changes. You are the ones who are responsible for these innovations, right? You need to make sure that we are finding enough solutions, innovative solutions, creative ideas, and putting them into action and implementing and executing them to meet these resource use efficiency that the world requires today. Right? It can be done. It can be done, yes. Because sustainable development goals, again, you might have heard or you might have seen and encountered and come across these. We are living in this era, right? We have set them in 2015. The UN did set them in 2015, right? Now that we are sitting in 2023. And only 7 more years are there for us to achieve them. There are 17 sustainable development goals, in all of which the youth's engagement or the young generation's contributions are very much required. So it's up to you all to make sure that you contribute in your own ways, that you contribute to the fullest of your creativity and innovativeness and your sensibility, your responsibility as responsible citizens, as responsible individuals. We all can contribute to all these goals. Yes. All right. So if you really are interested, you may really search and study about more about SDGs. These are very interesting. Once you become knowledgeable, once you become educated, you tend to be more responsible. Yes. And then you are just a focal individual, perhaps inside your family as at now. Once you come to the university, you become an individual. And when you are educated, when you have this awareness, you can create another circle of educated individuals around you. And they would disseminate that knowledge to their friends. And from their friends to their friends, likewise, this is a message that we have to spread over. Please understand that. So you can start today. You can start today. By being inside your own family, own home, you can start it. And once you come here, you can implement it even further. Because you are coming into a wider community. Inside your hostels, inside the lecture rooms, inside the faculty, inside the entire university, you might create a change for sustainability, for a sustainable lifestyle, right? Right. So this is what I've been talking about, efficient use, doing more and better with less, doing more and better with less. This is what we have to follow all the time. Trying to do more with less, trying to make sure that our efficiency is gone up, right? So one interesting tool that we can have in doing more and better with less is life cycle approach. This is a new concept that I thought I just would shed a little light on during today's talk. Life cycles. When have you heard this term last? Life cycle. When have you heard it last? Is it during the life cycle of a butterfly? All right, maybe. There might be numerous instances where you came across life cycle. Today, perhaps some of you know that this life cycle approach is being widely used for products. Right? Because we need to think about the generation of waste. It's a real concern today because it pollutes our environment, right? Waste is a pollutant. If the waste is perceived as a waste, it is a pollutant. If it is perceived as a resource, it's not. Can waste be perceived as a resource also? Yes. Waste can also be looked at as a resource. Yes. Somebody's waste might be a resource for some other industry. Or else, if we are going to achieve zero waste, it would be even better. What does that mean? zero waste? Can we achieve that? Of course we can. How? By circulating the waste back into the process. That is what is simply done during recycling. The waste is recirculated into the same process or some other process. So these concepts have gained a lot of significance by today through this approach called life cycle approach. Life cycle approach. Earlier, in conventional thinking, we have been having this linear concept for a product. You take any product. It could be your pens and pencils, books and magazines. It could be the mobile phones, laptops. It could be the washing machines, the refrigerators that you have in your home. It could be anything. It could be any product. It could be your own garment that you're wearing right now. All that starts with a stage called raw material extraction. Just take a moment and think. If you think about your cotton shirt, where had it all started? It all started firstly from some cotton cultivation somewhere on this earth. Might be not in Sri Lanka, might be something somewhere else. So what amount of water has gone into the cotton cultivations? Think about all the resources that it had required. And actually, this raw material extraction and then the production. You take the t-shirt example again. So the cotton was grown, cultivated, yarn was made or the threads were made, and then it came into the production facility. Again, in Brazil or in Vietnam or Cambodia or China, wherever. Production facility. Can you just imagine what amount of an impact has it created on the environment during the production level? Huge amount of emissions, wastewater, various sorts of production. So after the raw material stage, it is the production stage. And then comes the transport. Had it been made somewhere and imported, can you imagine what amount of fossil fuels had gone into your product? Because it had to have been transported from ship cargo perhaps, right? You know ship navigation and the amount of carbon dioxides that it would emit throughout. Transport, if it had been made in Sri Lanka, still it has to be transported, right? At the cost of a diesel or whatever that. And then comes the use phase. Now that you are wearing it, for how many years are you going to wear it? Are you going to throw it away just after 2 years, 3 years? How sustainable are you in that aspect? Use, reuse, use, reuse, 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 and reuse. That is why reusing is important. The use stage also is a very, very significant stage in a life cycle of a product. Use. And also think about the amount of detergents, the amount of water that would go into washing your clothes during its entire time, right? And then the disposal. Finally, you would dispose it, right? Hopefully, if it was a cotton one, it would be degraded. But what if it was a polyester one? It would impact on the environment even after its disposal. That is why today we are thinking about a different approach, which we call life cycle approach. We are closing the loop. End of life disposal is directed back to raw material stage. All right. This is a wonderful concept. So you all, once you are familiar, once you get some knowledge about these concepts, you might become innovators of today and future leaders of innovation for a better world, for an environmentally sound world. These are required product life cycles and eco-design, new designs for products, sustainable product designs. Right? I'm sure most of you all have encountered sustainable products, sustainable product designs, and there are numerous softwares as well. that might aid you, help you, and assist you in making decisions. What material have I got to use? You can easily compare material A with material B. Which one is the most environmentally friendly material, likewise? Right? At the same time, you can compare entire life cycles also. Because in conventional times, we were not having these sort of comparisons enabled from software. But today we do. We have them. So entire life cycles have to be actually compared, not just a single stage, right? So if you take a washing machine example, one of the most prominent stages in a life cycle of a washing machine is the use phase, I would say. Use phase. Because during the entire time that it is being used by a consumer on a daily basis or on a certain frequency during a week, you might be using it. So what about the water use efficiency of that machine? How many liters of water is going to go into your washing process? If your water use efficiency is higher in your washing machine, then you are more sustainable than something that is not like that. So that is why entire life cycles have to be assessed in making our purchase decisions. Right? One more very interesting example is you all might perhaps know about the disposable diapers for kids and infants. Right? It does the greatest harm during the end of life disposal because the use phase is very, very small, very short. It might be requiring a huge and enormous amount of raw material to produce it. And if it is going to be something imported, then it involves a huge transportation burden on the earth. Right? After the production, it involves a huge transportation burden. The use phase would only last maximum 4 to 6 hours. Right? The recommended is 4, but let's say 6. Just for the use of 4 hours, what amount of resources are going into a single diaper of a kid? And what amount of oil or petroleum is going to be burned for it to be imported to the country and transported? It's just going to be used for 4 hours. And afterwards, it's going to be disposed. It's going to be disposed. And it contains ingredients that are not degradable. What harm are we going to do? But these are all we are just comfort-seeking people on this earth. But have we ever been rational in making our choices? So these are the problems that are ahead of us, right? So it's high time that we need to make sure that we are turning into sustainable lifestyles. And you can make the change. We have numerous new approaches. We have softwares. We have a kind of a very enabling environment all the way, right? What we need is, we need the willingness to change, the willingness to be educated, the willingness to know the facts, and the willingness to create a ripple effect. What is a ripple effect? That's why I said, inside your own home, you are a focal person. If you choose to make a change, it's easy for you to create the change among your family. That is what you call a ripple. Once you come into a wider community, it might be even effective. Why? Because you make a change and your friends would be also changing the lifestyles. Their friends would also be changing these. The Faculty of Applied Sciences is a place where environmental management is a real concern because we do have our own Department of Natural Resources. We have to be exemplary in all means, right? It does never mean that it is only the environment people or the Department of Natural Resource people that is sufficient that they practice their own environmental friendly methods and all. No, and never. You will start to feel your own pride. You will start to feel a kind of a prestige, a kind of esteem as a Faculty of Applied Science graduate. if you created this culture, this type of a culture in the faculty, the reward might come back to you, I would assure. So please make sure that you start to think in a little different way. I'm sure most of you all have been having these attitudes, these awareness and these sense, but make sure you improve it. It's high time. It's high time that we have to change. We have to make a sustainability lifestyle. We have to think in a sustainable manner. We have to be sensible over the resources, the depletion and the degradation. Yes. If every single of us could make this, it's not really difficult that we can achieve this as a nation, right? And always there is no limit that you can go in the future. There are numerous opportunities out there in the world, right? The internet is at your fingertips. If you're really interested, just type COP28. I believe still there are certain opportunities left for you all to get registered yourselves at different fora and conferences, pre-conferences or conferences or summits. There are specific summits which are dedicated to the youth, which are dedicated to the university graduates, university undergraduates during these conferences also. So just surf through the web and make sure you find your own opportunities. We have enough examples where our students have represented global summits of this nature, right? Because you are the youth, there is huge emphasis placed on your generation. It has been recognized that the youth are the agents of change. You all are the agents of change, right? It's been a recognized norm. So make sure that you make the best out of that norm, right? So that is all that I had to actually give to all of you as a message. Once you find yourselves in the campus, in the university, you will find the Faculty of Applied Sciences having a number of initiatives that they would like to implement and they would be implementing, and they would like to have you all in. We do have a waste segregation effort, and the Society of Natural Resource Studies in the Department of Natural Resources, they are right now, they are in the last stages of making these plans of waste segregation and directing them to recycling and all that. Not just our faculty, there are various kinds of other faculties who are having nice, interesting initiatives towards recycling, reusing and all that, right? One example that comes to my mind is the Faculty of Management Studies. They have many initiatives going in there also. So you can join all that also. It's not just confined to one faculty all the time. Once you become a university, Sabaragam University person, you will always have all sorts of opportunities across the faculties also. So make sure your university life would be something of worth, not just for you, but for the rest of the community also. So that is my last request. Thank you.